What's going on, everybody? Welcome back into the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. My name is Lucas Wencl, and today we are talking about 10 players that you can look to drop after week 10 of the NFL season to make room for those waiver wire ads ahead of week 11. As always, we'll make sure to cover guys both in deep leagues and shallow leagues in this video. But before we dive on into that list of players, if you want a chance at winning a signed Josh Allen Bills helmet for free, courtesy of our friends at pristineauction.com, all you need to do is head to fantasypros.com/contest, complete the form, and either download the Fantasy Pros Draft Wizard app, leave a review for the podcast, or follow us on X, Instagram, or TikTok at Fantasy Pros. The more actions you complete, the more entries you receive. We'll be announcing a winner right here on the podcast, so if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to come claim your prize. Kicking off our list this week is Dallas Cowboys wide receiver Jalen Tolbert. It's not that Tolbert isn't out on the field for this team, but it's the situation around him that makes him droppable. Tolbert played the most snaps and ran the most routes of all Cowboys wide receivers on Sunday while commanding 5 targets. The problem, though, is that those were Cooper Rush targets, where Tolbert only caught 3 of them for a total of 14 yards. This is now back-to-back weeks where Tolbert has reeled in less than 20 receiving yards in his 5th time on the season with a weekly finish outside of the top 40 wide receivers. This offense will likely continue sputtering without Dak Prescott at quarterback, and there's rarely a week you're actually looking to start Tolbert. He can be dropped in almost all league formats except for the deepest of leagues. The next player you can look to drop this week is Isaiah Likely, tight end for the Baltimore Ravens. Likely sat out of Thursday Night Football's epic showdown against the Bengals once again, but that may just be the final nail in the coffin for him on fantasy football teams. Since week 2, Likely has only given you 2 games with more than 5 fantasy points, and only has 1 finish inside of the top 20 tight ends during that stretch. In week 9, he played a season-low 30% of snaps, which was a major dip from the 60 to 70% he had been playing all season. This one may hurt considering many managers spent a good chunk of fab on Likely after his week 1 performance, but unfortunately it's time to face the music and send Likely back to the waiver wire. The third player on our list is Jerome Ford, running back for the Cleveland Browns. If you held Ford through the team's week 10 bye to see what comes of week 11, I get it, but I'm not that optimistic. In week 9, Jerome Ford did lead this Browns backfield in snaps with 36 to Nick Chubb's 28. However, it was Chubb who got 16 opportunities on the afternoon to Jerome Ford's 4. What's even more curious, though, is that Ford ran 30 routes on his 36 snaps, indicating he was the preferred back in passing situations. Unfortunately, running routes doesn't get you fantasy points, even though Ford was out on the field more often. This feels very similar to the Baltimore Ravens backfield, where Justice Hill is a preferred back in passing situations, but it's Derrick Henry who actually piles up the production. The problem is that the Browns are a much worse offense, so you can still part ways with Ford as long as he's the clear second fiddle to Nick Chubb. Coming in next is Green Bay Packers wide receiver Christian Watson. Watson's a tricky one because you likely want to hold on to his upside in deep leagues, but in a small and shallow league, you've likely already dropped him. Here's the reality with Christian Watson, though. On the season, he's only given you 1 weekly finish as a top 20 wide receiver, compared to 6 finishes outside of the top 40 wide receivers. He's also had less than 20 receiving yards in half of his games this year, and only has 1 game where he's caught more than 3 passes. I really want to like Christian Watson, but it's tough to see the path forward with how Jordan Love spreads the ball out in this offense. Not to mention, he gets a brutal stretch of matchups coming out of the bye, drawing the Bears, 49ers, and Dolphins, who are all bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed to the position this year. Our next player that you can drop this week is Keon Coleman, wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills. Coleman had to sit out a Week 10's matchup with the Colts due to a wrist injury, and it's now being reported that he may miss time beyond Week 10 as well. I'm certainly no doctor, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's a strong possibility, considering the Bills have their bye week coming up in Week 12. Beyond that, Coleman's role in this offense is unstable now with the addition of Amari Cooper. He went on a mini heater in Week 7 to 8, scoring at least 16.5 fantasy points in both games, but outside of that, he's finished as the wide receiver 46 or worse in 6 of 9 games he's played in. Even if Coleman does play in Week 11 before their bye, it's a really poor matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs, who have allowed the 9th fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers this year. Another running back you can look to part ways with is Devin Singletary of the New York Giants. If it wasn't Tyrone Tracy time last week, it certainly is this week after their matchup in Germany against the Panthers. Tracy has been given at least 16 rush attempts in 5 of his last 6 games, and dominated snaps this week, playing 60 of a possible 75 compared to Singletary's 17. Singletary was given 8 rush attempts on Sunday and piled up 40 yards, but both were his most in a game since week 4 against the Cowboys. The final nails in the coffin for Singletary, though, are that the Giants go on bye in week 11, but then coming out of the bye, they get the Bucs, Cowboys, and Saints, who are all top 6 in fantasy points allowed to running backs this year. Tyrone Tracy doesn't appear to be letting go of his role anytime soon, and Singletary can be dropped in most league formats. Another tight end you can consider dropping is Kmet of the Chicago Bears. Outside of his tight end 2 finish in week 3 and tight end 1 finish in week 6, let me read you the rest of Kmet's weekly finishes this year. Tight end 48, tight end 17, tight end 21, tight end 21, tight end 38, tight end 57, and tight end 34. This is not a rosterable player on your team, especially with how poor Caleb Williams and this offense have been playing. The Bears offense has been 7th worst in EPA per play this year and the 6th worst in EPA per pass. You can't predict when it's worth trusting Kmet in your lineup, and you can do way better than him if you're still rolling him out week over week. If he's your backup tight end, cut him immediately because all he's doing is clogging your roster and restricting your flexibility as a manager. Unless you're playing in a 2-quarterback or superflex league, you can also look to part ways with Kmet's quarterback, Caleb Williams. Things were looking up before the Bears' Week 7 bye when Caleb Williams finished as the quarterback 6 and quarterback 1 in back-to-back games. Since then, though, it's been an absolute disaster, with Caleb finishing as the quarterback 28 in back-to-back weeks and finished as the quarterback 24 against the Patriots in Week 10. This Bears offense is so dysfunctional right now, and it's difficult to see how it improves going forward. This passing attack had 2 get-right games coming out of the bye against the Commanders and Cardinals, but fell flat on their face. In single quarterback leagues, there's little reason for Williams to be on your roster, especially if he's your starter. He's barely a streaming option until this offense improves, so you can either find a new quarterback on the waiver wire or drop him if he's your backup to give your roster some flexibility. Up next on our drop list is Minnesota Vikings wide receiver Jordan Addison. It's been a tough go for Addison this year, who just isn't getting enough volume to fall his way. His only game with more than 3 receptions this year was against the Colts in Week 9. He has 2 finishes inside of the top 20 wide receivers, but also has 4 finishes outside of the top 50 wide receivers. Addison's biggest boost last year came in the touchdown department, where he caught 10 of them. This year, though, he's only caught 2 in 7 games played. Now with TJ Hawkinson back, the piece of the passing pie will likely get smaller in future weeks for Addison, making him a big play-dependent fantasy asset. In shallow leagues, you can drop Addison for a more consistent contributor on your waiver wire, as the Vikings get Tennessee and Chicago, who are both bottom 4 in fantasy points allowed to the position in the next 2 weeks. And lastly, you can consider parting ways with Baltimore Ravens wide receiver Diontae Johnson. I get if you want to give the Diontae Johnson Ravens experiment more time, but in shallow leagues, you might not have time to waste with only 4 games until the fantasy playoffs begin. In his Week 9 debut with the Ravens, Johnson played 30% of snaps but didn't draw a target. Against the Bengals in Week 10, though, Johnson saw his snap share dip down to 8%, only playing 5 snaps in the entire game. You can maybe chalk this up to Diontae still getting acclimated to his new team, but it's not an optimistic path forward here. The engine of this offense is still Derrick Henry. It appears Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman will remain the top 2 wide receivers, and Mark Andrews is getting involved again now. Again, the clock is ticking for Diontae to prove his worth on your roster, and if you're in a shallow league, you can certainly look to move on from him if there's better options on your waiver wire. Alrighty, y'all, that's it. That's all I've got for you today, but before we sign off here, remember, if you want a chance at winning a signed Josh Allen Bills helmet for free, courtesy of our friends at pristineauction.com, all you need to do is head to fantasypros.com/contest, complete the form, and either download the Fantasy Pros Draft Wizard app, leave a review for the podcast, or follow us on X, Instagram, or TikTok at FantasyPros. The more actions you complete, the more entries you receive. We'll be announcing a winner right here on the podcast, so if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to come claim your prize when we announce it.